The storm battered the glass ceiling of the Great Hall, a chaotic drumming that made the silence inside feel heavier, more absolute. I loved these hours. The museum was a fortress of order, every artifact tagged, cataloged, and frozen in time. I walked the perimeter, the sharp click of my heels on the marble the only sound I allowed. It was my sanctuary, my control. Then the atmosphere shifted. The air thickened, charged with a sudden foreign heat. I stopped mid-stride. A shadow detached itself from the darkness of the Egyptian wing, fluid and silent. I reached for the radio on my belt, my thumb finding the panic button by instinct. But the intruder didn't run. She stepped into the pool of security light with a terrifying casualness. She wasn't armed. She was smiling, a slow, dangerous curve of lips that suggested she wasn't the one who should be afraid. Panic should have been my first reaction, but my mind went straight to assessment. Frozen calculation. The woman standing 10 feet away was a study in contradictions. She wore tactical gear, but it was tailored black leather that clung to her frame like a second skin, expensive and practical. She radiated a high-status confidence, the kind that usually came with a board seat or a royal title, not a felony charge. She looked me over, her gaze physical, unflinching. "Hello, Curator," she said. Her voice was low, a rich texture that seemed to vibrate through the empty hall. I kept my face blank. I glanced at the security panel on the nearest pillar. The status light was a steady, calming green. It should have been flashing red. The silent alarms were dormant. The pressure sensors were asleep. She hadn't just broken in. She had seduced the system into letting her pass. "You're good," I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the adrenaline spiking in my blood. "The sensors in this wing are weight calibrated to the gram." "I prefer meticulous," she corrected, taking a step forward. "Precision is a dying art, don't you think?" "Who are you?" Vega. The name landed with the weight of a gavel. Vega, the ghost. The art world's favorite urban legend. She was the one who took the Romanov necklace from the Hermitage without tripping a single laser. She was supposed to be a myth, a bedtime story for security directors. But the woman standing in front of me was very real. The scent of rain and expensive leather drifted across the gap between us. "You're here for the Vermeer," I stated, not asking. It was the only thing worth her skill level. Vega laughed, a soft sound that cut through the tension. "The Vermeer is a lovely piece. But I'm not here to take, Jenna. I'm here to admire. Thieves don't break into high-security facilities to admire the brushwork. This one does." She took another step. The distance between us shrank, and the air grew heavy, thick with proximity. I wanted to see if the rumors were true, about the collection and the woman who guards it. My hand was still on my radio. One press, and the night guard in the control booth would lock the building down. The police would be here in 3 minutes. It was my duty. It was my job. But I didn't press it. I looked at her, at the intelligent humor in her dark eyes, the relaxed posture of a predator who knows she has nowhere else to be. There was a magnetic pull, undeniable and terrifying. She was the chaos crashing against my order, and for the first time in years, I didn't want to fix it. I wanted to see what she would break. "You have 5 minutes," I lied, my hand dropping from the radio. "Before the next patrol sweep." Vega's smile deepened. She knew I was lying. She knew I had just let the wolf in the door. 5 minutes is an eternity if you know how to use it, she murmured. Thunder shook the building then, a violent crack that vibrated through the floorboards, isolating us in a bubble of charged silence. The outside world felt very far away. We were alone in the dark, and the gallery wasn't empty anymore. We walked. It wasn't a march to a holding cell, and it wasn't a guided tour. It was something in between, a prowl. We moved into the 19th century wing, where the air always felt heavier, cured by the scent of old varnish, dust, and the slow decay of oil on canvas. The storm outside was just a murmur here, muffled by thick walls and velvet drapes. I watched her move. Vega didn't walk like a visitor. She walked like she was navigating a landscape she had already mapped in her mind. She stopped in front of the Turner, the one with the churning sea and the dying light. It was a violent piece, full of noise rendered in silence. She stood with her hands clasped behind her back, tilting her head slightly. The leather of her jacket creaked, a sharp sound in the quiet. "The lighting is wrong," she said. It wasn't a question. I stopped beside her, careful to keep a professional distance, though the magnetic pull of her presence made the space between us feel charged. "The lighting is calibrated to prevent UV damage. It's preservation, not theater." "It's a cage," she countered, her voice dropping an octave, smooth and dark. "You've taken a storm and put it under a microscope. Look at the brushwork in the lower quadrant. The violence is flattened by your gentle, sterile lights." "It's a masterpiece," I defended, though my heart was hammering a rhythm that had nothing to do with art history. "It deserves to be safe." "Safe." She turned to me then, and the intensity of her gaze felt like a physical touch. "Is that what you value, Jenna? Safety? Keeping beautiful things behind glass where they can't breathe?" The sparring had begun. It wasn't about the painting anymore. It was a negotiation of dominance, masked as academic criticism. I crossed my arms, holding my ground. I value survival. Without this glass, that beauty fades. It rots. I keep it alive. You keep it in stasis. There's a difference. She stepped closer, invading the personal boundary I had drawn. The scent of her, rain, ozone, and something darker, like expensive tobacco, filled my senses. "You treat this place like a mausoleum. Everything pinned down, everything labeled, including yourself." "You don't know me," I said, but the denial felt thin. "Don't I?" She stepped closer, invading the personal boundary I had drawn. The scent of her, rain, ozone, and something darker, filled my senses. "I wonder what happens when the armor comes off. Does the storm get out?" She was dissecting me with the same precision I used on my exhibits. And God, it was intoxicating. To be seen, even by an enemy. "Show me," she whispered. She leaned in, her shoulder brushing mine. The contact was electric, a sudden shock of heat against the cool gallery air. She pointed a gloved finger at the canvas, hovering millimeters from the surface. "Look there, the glazing on the wave. Do you see it?" I leaned in, drawn by her focus. Our heads were inches apart. I could feel the warmth radiating from her, hear the steady, deliberate intake of her breath. I looked where she pointed. "The blue," I murmured, my voice trembling slightly. It's too bright." "Exactly." Her voice was a murmur against my ear, sending a shiver down my spine. "It's Prussian blue. But Turner used indigo in this period. The Prussian wasn't introduced to his palette until 3 years later." I pulled back, staring at the canvas, then at her. The implication hit me like a physical blow. "You're saying it's a forgery." "I'm saying," Vega said, her lips curving into that dangerous, knowing smile, "that you have an impeccable eye for structure, but you miss the soul because you're too busy checking the locks. It's a very good fake. Mid-20th century, probably a student of Heisler." "That's impossible. The provenance is ironclad." "Provenance is just a story people tell to sell things," she said, her voice rich with amusement. "And I know a thing or two about stories. I also know a thing or two about fakes." She turned, walking backward toward the archway leading to the sculpture garden, her eyes locking onto mine, challenging, teasing. "Come with me. There's something in the next wing you actually need to see. Unless you're afraid to leave your cage?" The challenge hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. She turned and vanished into the shadows of the next room. I stood there for a heartbeat, looking at the painting I had protected for 5 years, seeing the lie in the paint for the first time. Then I followed her. The transition to the sculpture garden was a physical shock. We left the scent of varnish and canvas behind, stepping into a cavernous space of stone and shadow. The air here was colder, regulated to preserve marble and bronze, and it bit through the thin fabric of my blouse. The glass roof was higher here, a vast architectural rib cage, exposing us to the violence of the storm above. Lightning flashed, turning the room into a strobe-lit tableau of frozen figures, gods and monsters trapped in white stone, watching us with blind eyes. Vega stopped at the edge of the checkered floor. The expanse before us was wide and empty, a kill zone for the uninvited. "Pressure plates," she whispered, her voice carrying effortlessly in the acoustic perfection of the hall. German engineering, variable sensitivity. They trigger at 10 pounds of pressure. You can't walk across, I warned, stepping up beside her but staying on the safe zone of the threshold. My voice was low, a reflex of the silence. The grid is active. One step and the steel shutters come down. You'll be trapped. I'm never trapped, Jenna. I'm just delayed. She looked at me, a challenge glittering in her eyes. Watch. She didn't walk. She flowed. It was a dance of terrifying precision. She moved across the tiles, distributing her weight with a fluid grace that defied physics, sliding rather than stepping. She was water moving over stone. I watched, mesmerized. It wasn't just the skill, it was the arrogance of it, the absolute, unwavering certainty that the world would bend to her rhythm. She paused in the center of the room, surrounded by the silent, white ghosts of the collection, and looked back at me. You're holding your breath, she teased. I'm waiting for the alarms, I lied. You're waiting for me to fall. She shifted, her weight settling on a tile that I knew, for a fact, should have triggered the sensors. It didn't. But I don't fall. I adapt. I keyed the bypass code into the wall panel, deactivating the floor. The green light flickered on. Vega laughed, a low, smoky sound that vibrated in my chest. You took the fun out of it. I took the risk out of it. I walked toward her, the click of my heels echoing sharply against the silence of her movements. The contrast was stark, my rigid, audible approach against her silent, fluid grace. I keep things safe. I keep them here, where they belong. Belong? She turned, trailing a gloved hand through the air near a bust of Hadrian, her fingers hovering millimeters from the cold stone. Does beauty belong in a cage? You lock these things away, Jenna. You freeze them. Art is meant to be felt. It's meant to be dangerous. You've turned it into a specimen. If I didn't lock them away, they'd be gone, stolen, destroyed by time or greed. Or loved, she countered. She stopped in front of a Rodin, the bronze figures twisted in an eternal, desperate embrace. The shadows played across the metal, making the muscles look like they were rippling under skin. Look at them. They aren't safe. They're consuming each other. That's what art is. It's consumption. It's messy and loud, and it ruins you. She turned to me, and the space between us evaporated. We were alone in the vast, cold hall, surrounded by stone bodies, but all I could feel was the heat radiating from hers. She was close enough that I could see the flecks of gold in her dark eyes, close enough to count the slow, steady beat of the pulse at her throat. The scent of her, leather, rain, and that expensive, subtle tobacco, overwhelmed the sterile smell of the museum. You want to touch it, she whispered. She wasn't talking about the statue. I can't, I breathed, my voice barely a ghost of sound. It's against the rules. Rules are just lines someone else drew in the sand to keep you small. She reached out, her hand hovering near my face, the leather of her glove radiating a strange animal warmth against my cheek without making contact. What do you want, Jenna? Not the curator. You. The air thickened, turning viscous. The urge to close the gap, to bridge the distance between my order and her chaos, was a physical weight in my chest. I wanted to know if she tasted like the storm. I wanted to know if her chaos felt as precise as her movements. My breath hitched. I leaned in, just a fraction, a surrender to the gravity she generated. I started, the truth hovering on my lips, dangerous and raw. Thud. The sound was heavy, unmistakable. The crash of a heavy boot against the floor in the corridor behind us. Then, the sweep of a flashlight beam cut through the darkness of the archway, slashing across the marble torso of a goddess. The spell shattered. The guard was here. The flashlight beam sliced through the darkness like a physical blade, cutting the air inches from where we stood. It was a violent intrusion, shattering the private world we had built out of shadows and whispers. My instinct was to freeze, to stand my ground and present my credentials. I was the curator. I belonged here. But Vega didn't operate on the logic of authority. She operated on the logic of survival. Before I could breathe, before I could even formulate the thought of calling out to the guard, she moved. It wasn't a panic move. It was a calculated shift of coordinates. Her hand clamped around my wrist, firm, possessive, undeniable, and she yanked me sideways. We vanished from the open floor of the sculpture garden, slipping into the narrow, dust-choked service alcove hidden behind the massive plinth of a Roman general. She pressed me back against the rough plaster of the wall. The space was impossibly small, designed for pipes and conduit, not people. Definitely not for two women trying to occupy the same breath. Vega stepped in, closing the remaining distance until there was no distance left. Her body walled me in, shielding me from the corridor, from the light, from the reality of my own job. The darkness here was absolute. It pressed against my eyes, heavy and disorienting. But if my sight was useless, my other senses flared into overdrive, screaming for input. The silence of the museum was replaced by the sudden, overwhelming proximity of her. I felt the cold, damp leather of her tactical jacket against the thin silk of my blouse. It was a shocking contrast, the rough, weather-beaten armor of a thief against the delicate, climate-controlled fabric of a curator. I felt the heat of her, radiating through the layers, a furnace burning in the dark. She was taller than me, just enough that when she leaned in, her breath ghosted against the sensitive skin of my throat. It was warm, steady, rhythmic. She wasn't afraid. I could feel it in the way she held herself. There was no trembling, no frantic energy. She was completely still, a statue carved from adrenaline and control. My own heart was hammering a frantic staccato against my ribs, a traitorous drumbeat that I was sure would give us away. "Quiet," she breathed, the word barely a vibration in the air. Her hand moved, sliding up my arm to rest against the wall by my head, boxing me in. The leather of her glove creaked softly, the sound deafening in the tight space. Heavy boots struck the marble floor of the gallery. Thud, thud, thud. It was Frank. I knew his walk. I knew the jingle of his keys, the specific cadence of his patrol. He was early. He was never early. He stopped just on the other side of the plinth. The beam of his flashlight swept the room again, the light refracting off the marble statues, casting wild, swinging shadows that danced on the ceiling like frantic ghosts. I stopped breathing. The logic of the situation crashed into me. I was hiding from my own security team. I was pressed against a wall, in the dark, with a woman who had broken into my sanctuary. I held the keys to the entire building in my pocket. All I had to do was speak. All I had to do was push her away and step into the light. But I didn't. I stayed. I let the darkness hold me. I let the weight of her body press me into the shadows. Vega shifted slightly, her thigh brushing against mine. The contact sent a jolt of electricity straight to my core, bypassing my brain entirely. The scent of her filled the alcove, the sharp, metallic tang of the rain she'd come in from, the rich, earthy smell of expensive leather, and beneath it all, something warm and human and intoxicating. It was the smell of the storm I had been watching from behind the glass. Now the storm was here, pressed against me, and I was breathing it in. Frank's radio crackled, a burst of static that made me flinch. Vega's other hand found my waist, steadying me. It wasn't a grab, it was an anchor. She was holding me in place, grounding me in the chaos. Her thumb brushed the fabric of my waistband, a small, unconscious movement that felt more intimate than a kiss. The footsteps receded. The beam of light swung away, chasing shadows down the corridor toward the modern wing. The heavy door at the far end of the gallery clicked shut. We were alone again. Safety returned, but neither of us moved. The danger had passed, but the tension had shifted. It wasn't about the guard anymore. It was about the fact that she was still pressing me against the wall, and I hadn't pushed her away. The air in the alcove was thick, charged with the heat we had generated between us. "He's gone," I whispered, though I made no move to leave the shelter of her body. "I know," Vega replied. Her voice was low, a velvet rumble in the dark. She didn't step back. If anything, she leaned closer. But the adrenaline, it's a difficult thing to let go of, isn't it? She was right. My pulse hadn't slowed. The fear had evaporated, replaced by a sharp, hungry curiosity. I was trapped, pinned, and completely, terrifyingly alive. We stepped out of the alcove, the separation immediate and cold. We walked in silence down the corridor until we pushed through the double doors of the modern wing. If the sculpture garden was a tomb, the modern wing was an operating theater. The sensors here triggered the lights automatically. Banks of high-intensity halogens flooded the room, bouncing off the stark white walls and the polished concrete floor. There were no shadows here, no velvet drapes, no alcoves, just ruthless, unflinching visibility. We were exposed. I blinked against the glare, feeling suddenly ragged. The perfectly tailored suit that usually made me feel invincible now felt like a costume. My hair was loose, escaping its pins. My pulse was still visible in my throat. I looked at Vega. The light was just as cruel to her, but it revealed things the shadows had hidden. It showed the fatigue etched around her eyes, the tension in her jaw, the way her tactical gear, so formidable in the dark, looked out of place against the clean, sharp lines of a Mondrian. She walked to the center of the room, her boots squeaking faintly on the polished floor. She stopped in front of a massive canvas, a field of white with a single, violent slash of red down the center. Subtle, she murmured, but the bite was gone from her voice. She sounded tired. It's about the disruption of peace, I said, the curator in me rising automatically to fill the silence. The intrusion of violence into a perfect void. It's empty, she corrected. She turned to look at me, and under these lights, I couldn't look away. It's just empty, Jenna. Like this room. Like this whole building at 3 a.m. It's not empty. It's curated. It's controlled. Is that what you tell yourself? She leaned back against the white wall, crossing her arms. The arrogance was slipping, revealing something sharper and more painful underneath. You spend your life guarding things that are already dead. You walk these halls, checking the locks, making sure nothing changes, nothing moves, nothing breathes. It's not a life. It's a shift. And your life is better? I shot back, the adrenaline turning into defensiveness. Breaking into places you don't belong, stealing things you can't display. You live in the dark, Vega. You don't exist unless you're taking something. I live for the moment the glass breaks, she said softly. I live for the rush. The feeling that for 10 minutes, I am the only thing that matters in the world. She paused, her gaze drifting to the red slash on the canvas. But the rush ends. The alarm stops ringing, the getaway car stops moving, and then it's just quiet. It's just me, alone in a room with a necklace I can't wear and a painting I can't sell. The admission hung in the sterile air between us. It was the first time she had been completely honest. The thief and the curator, both of us trapped in our own versions of a cage. Mine was made of rules and glass. Hers was made of adrenaline and isolation. Why are you here, Vega? I asked, my voice quieter now. The anger had drained away, leaving only a raw, aching curiosity. You said you came to admire, but you didn't look at the Vermeer. You barely looked at the Turner. You're not looking at the art. She pushed off the wall and walked toward me. In this light, there was no mystery, nowhere to hide. I saw the hesitation in her step, the way her eyes searched mine, looking for a signal. She stopped just outside my personal space. I didn't come for the art, she admitted. I checked the duty roster, Jenna. My breath caught. What? I knew the rotation. I knew the security protocols. And I knew who was working the floor tonight. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were unflinching, pinning me in place. I didn't choose this museum because of the collection. I chose it because of the curator. I've been watching you for a long time. The way you care for these things. The way you defend them. I wanted to know if you were as cold as you pretend to be. She reached out, her fingers grazing the back of my hand. The touch was light, tentative, but in the bright, exposing light of the modern wing, it felt like a shout. And, I whispered, what did you find? I found the storm, she said. I found the one thing in this building that isn't frozen. My heart hammered against my ribs. She hadn't broken in for a payday. She had broken in for me. The realization was terrifying, flattering, and completely insane. And God help me, I didn't want her to leave. There's something else, I said, making a decision that went against every protocol I had ever written. Something that isn't on the map. Something real. Show me, she said. I turned and led her toward the service door that didn't have a label. The door to the restoration lab didn't look like much. It was a beige slab of fire-rated steel, indistinguishable from a janitor's closet, located down a service corridor that didn't appear on the public maps. I punched in the code, not the curator's administrative sequence, but the private override I'd programmed for myself. And the magnetic lock disengaged with a heavy, satisfying clunk. I pushed the door open, and the smell hit us instantly. It wasn't the sterile, recirculated air of the public galleries. It was pungent, organic, and alive. Turpentine, linseed oil, damar varnish, and the dusty, sweet rot of old canvas. It was the smell of creation and repair, a scent that always made my heart rate drop. I flipped the switch, but only the task lights over the main workbench flickered on, casting the rest of the cluttered room in deep amber shadow. "This is different," Vega said. She stepped inside, her boots silent on the stained linoleum. She looked around at the chaos, the jars of pure pigment, the scattered brushes, the X-ray scans pinned to the corkboard. "This is messy." "This is where the work happens," I said, walking to the easel in the center of the pool of light. It was covered by a heavy linen cloth. Out there, everything is finished, perfect, dead. In here, things are still becoming. I reached out and pulled the cloth away. Beneath it sat a canvas that would never hang in the Great Hall. It was a mid-century portrait, a woman in profile. But violence had visited her. A jagged tear ran through the subject's shoulder, and the varnish was yellowed and cracking like a drought-struck riverbed. It wasn't valuable. It wasn't famous. It was broken. Vega moved closer, her eyes scanning the damage with that same predatory intelligence she'd used on the security grid. "Why this one?" she asked softly. "It's a minor work. The composition is unbalanced. The technique is adequate." "Because someone threw it away," I answered, picking up a small palette knife, feeling the familiar weight of the tool in my hand. "It was in the basement of an estate sale. Written off. Too damaged to save. Too insignificant to mourn." I looked at the tear, the jagged wound I had been stitching back together, thread by microscopic thread, for 6 months. "I like the broken things, Vega. The perfect ones, they don't need me. They just need a guard. This one needs a healer." Vega turned her gaze from the painting to me. In the warm, focused light of the workbench, the lines of her face softened. The thief's mask, that armor of arrogance and wit, slipped entirely. She looked at the tools in my hands, then up to my face. "You're not just a curator, are you?" she murmured. "You're not just a suit who checks the locks." "I fix what the world breaks," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Or I try to. She stepped into the light. The distance between us vanished. The restoration lab was small, intimate, a private bubble of solvent fumes and secrets. She reached out, but she didn't touch the canvas. She didn't touch the tools. Her hand, gloved in that soft, tactical leather, covered mine where it rested on the easel. The contact was electric. It wasn't the accidental brush in the hallway or the forced proximity of the alcove. This was deliberate. It was a claim. "You hide this part of yourself," she said, her thumb tracing the line of my knuckles. "You wear the tailored suits and the severe bun and the cold expression. But in here you're bleeding for something that can't love you back. It's my job." "It's your heart," she corrected. She stepped closer until her body blocked the light, casting me in her shadow. "You spend all your time protecting these things, saving them, loving them in secret." Her voice dropped, becoming a rough, sultry texture that vibrated against my skin. "Who protects you, Jenna? Who looks at you the way you look at this broken, forgotten painting?" My breath hitched. I couldn't move. I didn't want to move. "Nobody looks at the curator," I managed to say. "They look at the art. Then they're blind," Vega whispered. She brought her other hand up, her fingers grazing the sensitive skin of my neck, just below the ear. Her touch was warm, terrifyingly gentle. "I have held diamonds that have started wars." She leaned in, her forehead resting against mine, her breath mingling with the scent of turpentine. "And you are the most exquisite thing I have ever seen. You are the only thing in this entire building that is actually real." The air in the room grew heavy, thick with the weight of everything we hadn't said. The painting was forgotten. The museum was forgotten. There was only the heat of her body, the rough texture of her glove against my skin, and the terrifying realization that I wanted her to steal me. I wanted her to take me out of the glass case and run. I leaned into her touch, my eyes fluttering shut. Vega. Beep, beep, beep. The sound was sharp, digital, and relentless. It sliced through the moment like a razor. The sound was sharp, a digital intrusion that shattered the fragile, turpentine-scented world we had built. The beep was rhythmic, insistent, a digital heartbeat that synced with the sudden spike in my own pulse. Vega pulled back, her movement sharp and economical. The softness that had been in her eyes a second ago vanished, replaced instantly by the cold, hard calculation of the operator. She checked the complex chronograph on her wrist, her jaw tightening as she read the glowing numbers. The thief returned, pushing the lever aside. "That's the 3-minute warning," she said, her voice stripped of the sultry playfulness. It was all business now. The sensors on the roof will recalibrate in exactly 180 seconds. If I'm not gone by then, I'm not leaving. The reality of the night crashed back in, shattering the illusion of our private world. The restoration room, with its amber light and smell of comfort, suddenly felt like a trap. I looked at the door. I knew the security protocols better than I knew my own blood type. At 3:15 a.m., the perimeter lockdown engaged. Frank would be doing the secondary sweep of the exits, checking every seal. The motion detectors in the main corridors would switch from passive to active, flooding the grid with invisible tripwires. "You can't go back the way you came," I said, the curator's logic overriding the woman's desire. "The east wing is already sealed. The pressure grid in the sculpture garden is live again. You're boxed in." "I know." Vega didn't move toward the door. She didn't panic. She stood perfectly still, watching me with an intensity that made my knees weak. "There's only one way out now, the maintenance access on the north terrace." "The terrace door is mag-locked," I countered. "It requires a biometric override and a master keycard." My hand went to my pocket, my fingers brushing the cold nylon of my slacks. The hard plastic edge of the keycard dug into my hip. It was a simple object, innocuous and bureaucratic, but right now it was the heaviest thing in the room. It was the symbol of my authority. It was my control. And right now, it was the only thing standing between Vega and a federal prison cell. It was the difference between a memory and a mugshot. She knew. She didn't look at my pocket, but she knew. "Jenna," she said softly. She didn't run. She didn't try to charm me or trick me or overpower me. She just stood there, unarmed and waiting, handing me the weapon that could destroy her. It was the ultimate gamble. She was betting her freedom on the split-second connection we had forged in the dark. "If I open that door," I whispered, the words tasting like ash, "I am compromising everything." "You're protecting the collection," she corrected. "I haven't taken anything. Remember? I came to admire." She took a step closer. "If you don't open it, you go back to your desk tomorrow. Safe, but alone." I looked at her, then at the broken canvas on the easel. The woman in the painting was trapped in oil and varnish. I wasn't. I could move. I could choose. "You're asking me to be an accomplice," I said. "I'm asking you to be free," she replied. My heart hammered a frantic, irregular rhythm against my ribs. Duty was a cold companion. It didn't look at me like I was the masterpiece. It didn't make the air charge with electricity. It kept me safe, but it kept me numb. I pulled the card from my pocket. The white plastic caught the light, gleaming like a promise. It weighed a ton, but as I held it, the weight felt necessary. "The stairs are steep," I said, my voice trembling. "And wet." Vega's smile returned, faint but real. "I like a climb." I walked to the door, not the one we entered, but the heavy fire door at the back of the lab. I swiped the card. The light turned green. The lock disengaged with a sound like a gunshot. The stairwell was a concrete throat, swallowing the warmth of the lab and replacing it with a damp, metallic chill. We moved fast. It wasn't a panic run. Vega didn't do panic, but a rapid, calculated ascent that burned in my lungs. The click of my heels echoed sharply against the bare walls, a frantic, staccato rhythm that sounded like a distress signal. Ahead of me, Vega moved with that same terrifying silence, her boots finding purchase on the slick metal treads without a sound. She was a shadow, flowing upward, pulling me in her wake. We hit the landing and I slammed my shoulder against the crash bar. The door didn't just open, It exploded outward, caught by the gale force wind that had been battering the glass ceiling all night. The storm seized us instantly. It was a physical assault, a wall of freezing rain and noise that tore the breath from my throat. I stumbled, the slick tarot of the roof decking treacherous under my dress shoes. But Vega was there. Her hand clamped onto my arm, steadying me against the onslaught. We were standing on the precipice of the world. Below us, the city was a sprawling circuit board of indifference, a grid of wet asphalt and blurred streetlights that didn't care about the drama playing out on the museum roof. The wind whipped my hair across my face, blinding me, stinging my skin. It was chaos. It was the opposite of the climate-controlled, hushed reverence of the galleries below. Down there, time stood still. Up here, time was running out, bleeding away with every second that ticked on Vega's chronograph. She didn't waste a moment. She moved to the parapet, the stone ledge slick with rain, and began to work. I watched her, mesmerized by the efficiency of her movements. She unclipped a carabiner from her belt, the metal gleaming dull and wet in the ambient city glow. She tested the anchor point, a heavy iron stanchion used by the window washers, with a sharp, brutal tug. It held. She was in her element now, a creature of heights and edges, while I stood shivering in my silk blouse, feeling more exposed than I ever had in my life. "You have 60 seconds, I shouted over the wind, hugging my arms to my chest to keep the tremors at bay. Vega stopped. She didn't clip the line. She didn't check her descent path. She turned, her back to the drop, and looked at me. The rain had plastered her dark hair to her face, water tracking down the sharp line of her jaw, dripping from her chin. She looked wild, dangerous. And in that moment, she was more beautiful than any marble goddess I guarded downstairs. "I have time," she countered, her voice carrying under the wind, low and steady. She closed the distance between us. It wasn't the predatory stock of the gallery anymore. It was a gravitational pull. The storm raged around us, tearing at our clothes, screaming in our ears, but the space between our bodies became a vacuum of intense, focused silence. She reached out, her wet, gloved hands cupping my face, her thumbs brushing the rain from my cheekbones. The leather was cold, but the heat of her palms burned through it. "Why did you do it?" she asked, her eyes searching mine, dark and unreadable in the night. "Why give me the key?" "Because you were right," I admitted, my voice breaking, lost to the wind. "I wanted to see the storm get out." She didn't smile. This wasn't a game anymore. The intellectual sparring, the cat-and-mouse chase through the exhibits, that was over. This was raw. This was the crash. She leaned in, and I met her halfway. The kiss wasn't soft. It couldn't be. It was desperate, tasting of rain, adrenaline, and inevitability. It was a collision. Her mouth was hot against the freezing rain on my skin, a shock to the system that made my knees buckle. I gripped the lapels of her tactical jacket, pulling her closer, anchoring myself to the only solid thing in a world that had suddenly tilted on its axis. It was a kiss of precision and hunger, a confirmation of every tension we had felt in the silence below. She kissed me like she was stealing something she intended to keep. She kissed me like I was the only masterpiece she had ever truly wanted to touch. For a moment, the cold vanished. The fear vanished. There was only the pressure of her lips, the slide of her body against mine, the terrifying realization that I had spent my entire life building a fortress just to let this one woman scale the walls. Then she pulled back. The separation felt like a physical blow, a sudden loss of pressure that left me gasping. She rested her forehead against mine for 1 second, just one, before stepping back to the edge. The connection severed, leaving the cold to rush back in. She clipped the line to her harness with a decisive metallic snap. The thief was back. The lover was gone. "I have to go," she said, leaning back over the void, her weight supported entirely by the thin black rope. "I know," I whispered, watching her prepare to vanish into the dark. Vega leaned back into the void, her weight supported entirely by the thin black line, her boots planted against the lip of the stone parapet. The wind whipped between us, a chaotic, freezing force that tried to tear the moment apart, but her gaze held me in place. She looked wild in the storm, her hair plastered to her face, her eyes dark and alive with a terrifying exhilaration. She wasn't looking at the drop. She was looking at me. "You're going to get caught," I shouted over the gale, the words tearing from my throat, raw and desperate. It wasn't a threat anymore. It was a fear I hadn't realized I was capable of feeling. Vega just smiled. That same slow, dangerous curve of lips that had started this entire collision. "Not tonight, Jenna. The night is still mine." "Don't come back," I lied, shivering as the rain soaked through my blouse, chilling the skin she had just warmed. "I'll double the sensors. I'll recode the grid. I'll make this place a fortress you can't breach." "I count on it," she called back, her voice cutting through the wind with impossible clarity. "Make it difficult, Jenna. Make it a challenge. I don't want the Vermeer. I don't want the Turner." She paused, and for a second the storm seemed to hold its breath around us. "I'm coming back for the Curator." She didn't say goodbye. She just let go. One moment she was a solid, warm presence against the skyline, and the next she was a shadow, plummeting into the dark. The rope hissed through the carabiner, a snake vanishing into the grass. I rushed to the edge, gripping the wet stone until my knuckles turned white, leaning out over the abyss. I watched her descend, a rapid, controlled fall into the alleyway below. She landed in a crouch, a dark blur against the wet pavement, and then she was gone, swallowed by the city's indifference. I stood there for a long time. The adrenaline crashed, leaving me hollowed out and shaking. The cold rushed back in, brutal and unforgiving. I was alone on the roof, surrounded by millions of dollars of art, but I had never felt poorer. The walk back down was a funeral march for my composure. I locked the roof door, my hands trembling so badly I dropped the keycard twice. The stairwell felt oppressive now. The museum was no longer a sanctuary. It was a cage I had voluntarily walked back into. I returned to the restoration lab, needing to hide the evidence of my own unraveling. The smell of turpentine and old canvas was the same. The amber light was the same. But the room felt different. It felt occupied. I walked to the workbench to cover the damaged portrait, to seal away the vulnerability I had exposed. That's when I saw it. Tucked into the corner of the easel, held in place by a palette knife, was a scrap of paper torn from a field notebook. I picked it up, my fingers leaving damp smudges on the edge. It was a sketch, done in charcoal, quick, brutal, and brilliant. It wasn't a statue. It wasn't a masterwork. It was me. It was a profile of me, staring at the broken canvas, my guard down, my expression raw and open. She must have drawn it in seconds while I was mixing solvents, capturing the one thing I tried so hard to hide. At the bottom, in elegant architectural script, she had written a single word: masterpiece. I sank onto the stool, the paper trembling in my hand. I had spent the night protecting the collection, ensuring nothing was taken. But looking at the charcoal smudge of my own face, I realized the truth. The theft was successful. She hadn't taken the art. She had stolen my composure. She had stolen the ice I wrapped around my heart. The morning crew arrived at 6. The heavy thud of the main doors unlocking signaled the return of order. Cleaners polished the floors, guards reset the perimeter. I stood at the main desk, watching the sun bleed through the glass ceiling, touching the spot on my neck where her breath had lingered. The gallery wasn't empty anymore. It was waiting. And so was I. If you want to see if the thief keeps her promise, subscribe to the channel.